Hello everybody and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History. Now this video is a little bit of an outlier. Let me explain. Remember when I first started the channel a couple of years ago with my 50,000 years of fashion history, I broke the 19th century down into 3 or 4 little smaller videos because of course it is such a huge and rich fashion century. 1800 to 1830, the 1830s and 1840s, 1870 to 1900, and you can see something is missing here. What? The 1850s and 1860s. For some reason, I forgot to upload it. Over the past couple of years, I have had so many requests to upload the 1850s and 1860s to complete the 19th century set, and I didn't do it because, as you know, I am terribly lazy, but today I have done it. Now remember, this is culled from a much longer classroom video, so I sound a little bit teachery and maybe a little bit patronizing. Forgive me for that. I dive straight in as well because it's an edit from the entire 3-hour 19th century video lecture. So let's go. The 1850s and 1860s, and by the way, I make no bones about how ridiculous I think this fashion era is, but I do have a few theories of my own that I think you might find interesting. Let's talk about sex, baby. The 19th century had a very prudish and uptight attitude about sex. Although prostitution thrived and the new medium of photography saw the birth of pornography, the middle-class Victorian mindset believed sex to be an incredibly taboo subject. And by the 1850s, fashion, of course, responded with this, the hoop skirt. And you thought the 1830s were ridiculous, right? Again, let's quash that childbearing hips myth. Hoop skirts had absolutely nothing to do with women wanting to show they had childbearing hips. I have no idea why people think this, because there is certainly not a scrap of evidence that suggests that this is what the hoop skirt was meant to suggest. It's not. No. The hoop skirt was the sartorial expression of Victorian prudery. It not only kept a lady's private parts at a safe distance from the outside world, it stopped men getting too close to her. And we have some evidence that certainly suggests that this is what the hoop skirt was really all about. This is a contemporaneous cartoon of this gentleman here trying to shake hands with this lady, but he can't get anywhere close to her hand because of her hoop skirt, so he's kind of balancing with his umbrella on that lamppost. Totally ridiculous, but it makes the point, doesn't it, about what the hoop skirt was really about. And look at this cartoon. This guy is giving this lady an hors d'oeuvre. In fact, all around the men are holding sort of snacks or hors d'oeuvres on these very long spoons or platters because they can't get anywhere near to the woman. These are satirical cartoons, of course, but they certainly speak to what the hoop skirt was really subconsciously about. Hoop skirts at the time and now were known as crinolines. Okay, in the 1830s and 1840s, the word crinoline was starting to be used, but these were simply stiff petticoats. We looked at those in the 1830s that incorporated horsehair crin that gave skirts volume, like this. Yet by the 1850s, the cage crinolines, and I think that the clue as to the real purpose of the crinoline is in the name, cage crinolines, were ubiquitous, and they looked like this. The shape of the crinoline changed a little between the 1850s and the 1860s. You can see the change in shape here, right? The 1850s, the cage crinoline. The 1860s, the elliptical cage crinoline. You can see the emphasis and the shape starts to veer out at the back. This is a dress from the 1850s, a cage crinoline. And here we have one from the 1860s, an elliptical cage crinoline. You can see the difference in shape, right? Everyone who was fashionable
wore a hoop skirt, wore a crinoline. Young women, children, toddlers. Oh my goodness, she might be the cutest thing we've looked at all semester. They were ubiquitous. So let's do an anatomy and witness firsthand how mid-19th century fashion utterly desexualized a woman. So let's start with a beautiful naked lady. There she is. She's lovely. Let's make her totally unsexy. First of all, let's give her some pantalettes. Then a shift. Then a corset, tightly laced. Over that, let's just protect everything and keep all of this business at a distance with her crinoline, over which went a petticoat. And then a high-necked and really quite ugly dress. Please note her sleeves, they are called bishop sleeves. Bishop sleeves. Then let's give her arguably one of history's most unflattering hairdos. And a bonnet. And there we have it. Suddenly our beautiful, sexy naked lady doesn't look quite so sexy anymore, does she? And this is how women dressed. Look at that haircut. And again, a good example of the bishop sleeve. The erogenous zone was the shoulder. The one moment of sexy sartorial expression a Victorian woman was allowed during the 1850s and 60s was evening wear, ball gowns, evening dresses, and the erogenous zone was the shoulder. So you will see a lot of low-shouldered or off-the-shoulder gowns, like this one. You still have the crinoline there, but this is very risque. It's showing a lot of shoulder. This is showing less shoulder, but you see the idea here. And again, check out the crinolines. These are actually quite pretty dresses. As soon as you pull these gowns off the shoulder, then suddenly the crinoline almost seems kind of sexy, doesn't it? But for day, not sexy in my opinion at all. And because there's nothing like reviving a bad idea, and fashion loves to revive bad ideas, here are some recent runway that have embraced the concept of the crinoline. Yeah, like anyone is ever going to wear this. But restrictive and ridiculous as this moment in fashion was, there were women who were ready to push for dress reform. Amelia Bloomer being the most famous. She thought crinolines were quite ridiculous and restricted a woman's life. And so she and her followers did something shocking. They wore these sort of billowy harem pants almost, as depicted here, with short or shorter knee-length jackets. These billowing trousers were called bloomers in her honor. There were very few women who dressed like this, very few. However, it's interesting to note that there were women who were willing to make themselves extremely unpopular with the mainstream by pushing for dress reform. Imperialism raises its fashion head again during this period with this, the pagoda dress. The pagoda dress was a gown fashioned upon tiers, and these tiers are called flounces. Here is another example of a pagoda dress. This is a pagoda. A pagoda is a tiered building found in Asia. And you have guessed it, this period marks the colonization by England, Spain did it too, and the Dutch, of various nations in Asia and Southeast Asia. Britain even colonized Hong Kong. So this, again, is imperialism in fashion. Fashion is not an island. What is it? It is a response. And just in case you don't completely get why these are called pagoda dresses and why they are all about imperialism, take a look at the grey dress on your right and see that these flounces and this shape corresponds to a pagoda. Take a look at the sleeves, the pagoda sleeves on the pink dress. To your left, again, you see the pagoda. And here is a photograph of somebody in a pagoda dress. And here are some recent runway that sort of embrace these flounces found on pagoda dresses. Another imperialist expression in fashion was paisley. Paisley was so popular, every woman in the Victorian era owned a paisley shawl. You also found paisley design and paisley print on dresses. And just to remind you close up, this is a paisley print. It wasn't actually initially called paisley. It became known as paisley because there is a town in Scotland that was particularly good at weaving paisley print and embroidering paisley and designing paisley. And the town, you may have guessed it, is called Paisley. But paisley comes from India. This is an Indian and a Persian motif. So again, imperialism, right? And here is a portrait from this era of a woman wearing a paisley shawl. But imperialism also defined male facial fashion. When we think of the Victorian man, we think of mustaches, these huge, extravagant handlebar mustaches. Every man from the mid-1800s until the end of the century sported a mustache and or whiskers, these huge, fluffy sideburns. Wow! And again, it'll come as no surprise. During an era when Britain had utterly taken over the subcontinent, India, this came from India. This is how Indian men did facial hair, with these big whiskers and mustaches. Imperialism. It was everywhere, truly everywhere in this era. I'm not saying imperialism is back, but recently hipsters have re-embraced this exaggerated Victorian beard, mustache, sideburn thing. It's quite spectacular, but rather silly. I haven't really spoken much about menswear in the past 10 or 15 minutes because, you know what, there's not much to say. The frock coat would replace the tailcoat for all occasions other than evening, but check this out. The 1850s, the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s, and the 1890s. There's not much difference here, is there? Yes, the frock coat was longer in some eras, shorter in others, but it's basically the same idea. I told you the 19th century is when men stopped doing fashion. So, which decade does this suit come from, do you think? Well, if we take away the top hat, if we take away the handlebar mustache, if we put it in a modern setting and return it to its real color, this is a suit from today. Men's fashion has not essentially changed in almost 200 years. Poor guys.
So there we have it, the 1850s and 1860s edit. If you would like to learn more about the other decades of the 19th century, they are all on the Ultimate Fashion History. In fact, I'll start a playlist just for the 19th century. But listen, we have fashion history from the Neolithic era all the way through to today. So, subscribe. And as always, thanks ever so much for watching.